Next, we have with us one of the premier environmental organizers in the country, an individual who's worked with the Humane Society of the United States and with the Foundation on Economic Trends, and someone who I know is going to deliver some very important messages to us, Cindy Brinkman.
Hi, and I'm real excited to be here, and I'm real excited to get to know who you folks are too and why you're here. I'd like to share a little bit with you about what it means to me to be here with you and also to be here with the Rainbow Coalition this weekend. I have so much respect for what each one of us happens to be doing, not only in the big way, but also in the smaller ways that both Sasha and Clay just alluded to, and for what we are working to heal. I know that oftentimes in our work, especially at the community local level, it can be very frustrating and very disillusioning because the injustices that we see and that we feel and that penetrate so deep are so great, and the pain is immense. And I know it's a pain that I carry with myself every day, and I wake up with it and I go to bed with it. Our victories are seemingly, they have been in the past, so small. But we are walking on a great path, and we are living in what I believe to be the most exciting of all times. It's a little bit presumptuous, a little bit bold of me to say, a little bit audacious, I guess, because I haven't lived in other times. But I do believe that this next decade and the next century, it's going to be the telling time. It's going to be the transitional time. Will life, as it has evolved on the planet, will it be able to continue? We are living it. We will determine that, folks. And those of us that have gathered for this event, I believe that we are driven by probably the most powerful of all life forces, and that of passion and love, that of justice, that of truth, and that of hope. And we realize, we recognize in our bellies, we know this very deep down within, that our Western culture has strayed very far away from what it means to be and to live in harmony, in a symbiotic way with our surroundings and with each other. We even have a hard time with our own species, let alone all the others. And you folks are at the roots of the so-called status quo, but more importantly, you're shaking that. And you're making history. And I thank you for sharing this opportunity for me to be here with you so I can communicate with you and talk with you about how we can all carry this torch forward and work more closely together, because it's going to take each one of us together. One of the most important beliefs that I hold is that we are all teachers, and that our greatest challenge in this life is to teach each other how to have vision and how to have a love affair with the deepest, truest part of ourself. And when that happens, all sorts of other magical thing follows. All sorts of other magical things follow. In order to clean up the external environment, I think we are realizing that we first must go within, and we must go pretty deep. And when that happens, we begin to treat our brothers and sisters with respect, and then that ethic also happens to extend to the earth and to all of its inhabitants, including the non-human animal inhabitants with whom we share this planet. And this way of living, this potential way of living, it's in us all. And we must challenge and teach each other how to listen to that deep, deep, peaceful place that is in us all. And I am proud to say that I am radical. And how many of you heard Jesse yesterday when he spoke about the true nature of what it means to be radical? How many of you heard that? And essentially what he spoke about was the essence of the golden rule, Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And he talked about change. And what we are working for and striving for is change at the roots, at a very, very fundamental level. So yes, I'm assuming we're all pretty radically spirited people. I'm assuming we're all radically for peace, for justice. I'm assuming we're all radical for human justice, and I know that probably many of us are all working on homeless and hunger issues, minority issues. And I'm assuming that a lot of us are also rabid and radical environmentalists. Some of us, hopefully more of us, are becoming animal rights activists and understanding the connection. And we could go on and on about all the further connections. And yesterday, Jesse, what a visionary person, and what a wizard of a soul he is. In his masterful and magical way, he shared with us what he felt that vision meant, or the agenda for the future. If you recall, he talked about direction, distinction, expansion, and inclusion. Now, with that in mind, if we may for just 1 minute brainstorm, what are the other movements that also have that as an agenda? The other movement areas, or what does the Rainbow Coalition embrace? What are the different subsections? We're here, we have an environmental subsection. What else? Women's, feminists, what else? Health, housing, childcare, homeless, hunger, animal rights, consumer rights, education, right. Jan and I have been spending a lot of time crisscrossing across the country. And we have talked about this a lot recently. We feel something happening within all of these different movement areas. And it's something that's very powerful, and it's almost ineffable. I have a hard time articulating what it is I want to share with you right now. It's powerful. There's some kind of planetary gestalt shift taking place. And it sounds like you too are feeling it. I do a lot of work with grassroots organizations, with national organizations, with the little people out there, the so-called bigger people inside the DC Beltway, or they think. And I think all of us, we're feeling something that is happening. And I'd like to share a few ideas that I have about that. And I'd like to, in doing this, I'd like to focus for a minute on the animal rights movement. And I think some of us have a hard time relating to whatever that particular movement is about. And I'd like to articulate just one piece of one of the concerns that people who identify themselves as animal rights activists, what they have. They have become very aware of a cycle of death. And let me briefly articulate that. They see the wildlife, animals, let's focus in Western states, that are out doing their own thing, being wild. Then they see that millions of these wild animals are killed every year so that we can graze what we refer to as livestock, i.e. cattle. And then we graze billions of cattle, and then we kill these billions of cattle. So stay with me. First we kill the wildlife, and now we're going to kill the cows. And then after they work why do we kill them? We kill them so we can ingest them. And then they kill millions of laboratory animals, or animals that have been dubbed as laboratory animals. They're really animals that just happen to be in labs. They kill them to try to figure out what is killing us. Doesn't that sound a bit strange to you? And the connection that animal rights activists are making, and professionals, scientists, doctors, other people with incredible credibility, people within the research community themselves, is they're eating death. Of course, when we ingest violence, when we ingest flesh, there's something very powerful about that. And we all know what causes heart disease. We all know what causes strokes. We all know what causes diabetes and obesity and on and on and on. Even the Surgeon General has come out openly and has said now we need to be eating a little less meat. To me, that's like, well, let's have a little less rape in this country, or let's have a little less incest, or a few less murders. It's bad. It's not good. There have been all sorts of medical studies that have been coming out over the last couple of decades, and I'd like to just tell you briefly about one. How many of you know what dopamine is? It's a fear chemical that exists in our brain. And when animals are slaughtered, they have a response to that, like, I don't want to die, I want to live, kind of like us if we were to have the hatchet come our way. And they can't flee, so they are frightened, and they release all sorts of toxins and enzymes and chemicals into their bloodstream and into their muscles, which, by the way, is what we eat. One of these chemicals happens to be dopamine. And dopamine is also the chemical that when we get mean and angry and violent, that's the chemical that's going through our body. Well, in some of the recent studies, they have found that people that consume a lot of animal flesh, or even any animal flesh, have much higher dopamine levels in their brain than individuals who are pure vegetarians, that don't eat any animals, that don't eat any animal products. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? So anyway, animal rights people have been studying these kinds of things, and what I challenge us as a part of the Rainbow Coalition to embrace and to help our other colleagues who are a part of this Rainbow Coalition understand is that these issues are very related to our community. It is a minority issue. When we look at the studies, how many of you are familiar with Dr. Burdick, the studies that he's done in Africa, the problems that are in the U.S. as compared to Africa? Health problems are very different as they stem from diet. Colon cancer does not exist over there. It does exist here, all diet related. It's a very big issue for us. And I would also like to speak briefly about the the Globe Scope conference that we just attended out in Los Angeles. The recommendation, and I should say that this is a real premier environmental conference that is trying to embrace a lot of different issue areas. In their final recommendation, it was stated that by the year 1995, let's have a 50% reduction of meat and other animal products, as well as non-organic foods, which is very, very important. So anyway, I guess what I want to wrap up with is we need to be linking up with these other issue areas. They are us. We are all speaking the same language. We use maybe a little different jargon. And I use the animal rights community as an example because I feel that's a very, very blatant one. And I guess finally, I do want to underscore what the two previous speakers talked to, is that it is an individual matter. The biggest thing that we can do for the planet and for each other and for the minorities and for other people that are striving because they're in helpless situations, the most important thing we can do is look at our own lives and look at our lifestyle and cut out any and all aspects of exploitation, and that starts with the morning when we wake up, or in the morning when we wake up, and how we live our lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cindy. As we turn to the questions as to what we want to recommend to the Executive Committee of the Rainbow Coalition, I think that the speakers today have given us some good directions in terms of the kinds of broad issues that we're going to need to be able to look at. I would like to also raise one issue that I think has the capacity to pull a lot of these different kinds of things together for us, that was mentioned in a speech yesterday by Reverend Jesse Jackson, that was mentioned by many of the people in the empowerment seminars, and also was mentioned a lot of times out in the halls as people were discussing the kinds of things that we need to do to be able to focus these issues. There is right now a tremendous ocean of humanity rising up, concerned about the death of the planet, and with it, the consequent death of human beings. There's a tremendous outrage in the communities in this country over what they've seen in terms of what's happening to the environment. And they're trying to find ways that they can say, I want to be able to do something about it. One of the things that was put on the agenda yesterday was the question of D.C. statehood. Many people have said over the years that D.C. statehood's a question for the District of Columbia only. But as was mentioned yesterday, clearly it can go broader than that. Clearly, if we had 2 more United States senators from the District of Columbia, I would dare say right now that we would have 2 more powerful champions of the environment. Just as right now the Black Caucus has the best environmental record in the whole Congress, I would believe that whoever would represent the District of Columbia would be leaders on the environment. So, I would say this, that when we see people around this country today who have looked at the food issues and know that every time you take a bite of food you have to wonder whether you and your family are going to be ingesting carcinogenic matters which can give you cancer, and it is rising like a modern plague, those people should say, I want to see 2 more champions for the environment, and I support D.C. statehood because I want to have less pesticides in my food and protect my family from cancer. Those people should be for a state of New Columbia, as it would be called. The second point, every time you turn on your water, if you have regular tap water, 1 out of 5 tap water faucets in this country puts out water that has so much lead in it that it can threaten your children and give them serious mental retardation. That is an issue that people want to see some action on. We can't have our water supply system go down to a system where we're threatening our children's health. So those people need a champion. And D.C. statehood, no matter where these people might be in the country, could profit from that. As has been said by our speakers, Sasha mentioned, air pollution is principally a problem of the cities. You can get respiratory diseases, you can get cancer, you can get other kinds of terrible health consequences from the air we breathe. If we're going to be able to have leadership in the Congress, why shouldn't we have 2 more champions, 2 more senators from the state of New Columbia? So all of those who are concerned about the issue of air quality should be for the new state of New Columbia. In the area of toxic dumps, we've all heard of Love Canal, Times Beach. We've seen the groundwater no longer safe for human consumption, despite the fact that that's where much of the drinking water comes from. We've heard the terrible tales of birth defects. And so those people should say, I want 2 new champions for the environment, and therefore I'm for D.C. statehood. These issues are not separate issues in one respect. They are issues that all people face, rich and poor alike, of whatever race and whatever culture. But it is not just a national agenda that affects us anymore. In 1970, we had the first Earth Day. Dennis Hayes, one of the great environmental leaders of our time, stood up and said, let's have a show of demonstration of concern for the Earth. And millions of people turned out into the streets. The greatest demonstration in the history of America to say, we love the Earth and we want things done. And after Earth Day, 1970, we had the Environmental Protection Agency be established. Clean Air Bill passed. Clean Water Bill passed. Safe Drinking Water Bill passed. A whole series of things that made America better. So now Dennis Hayes has gathered together a premier group of people around him to put together another effort called Earth Day 1990. And on that board sits Jesse Jackson. And I think it is incumbent upon the Rainbow Coalition here to make sure that he gets all the support that he can have. Not only to bring minorities into the environmental movement where they belong and have a stake, but in addition to that, to expand this effort internationally because we found out something very profound over the last 20 years. We're not safe within the borders of just America. If the third world starts to have problems, we're going to have the problems. We're all in the same boat. We can no longer see a time where we're safe behind national borders. Acid rain, which kills lakes and endangers human health, does not respect national borders. Global warming, which could be the greatest environmental problem of the 21st century, does not respect national borders. The issue of seeing clouds of Chernobyl spew around the world has not shown any respect for national borders. When we see today 40,000 people, most of them children, die every single day, friends, because their ecosystems in large part have fallen apart and they cannot produce food. In Haiti, they have a saying, the only thing the soil can produce now is baby rocks. Why? Because the trees were cut, the rain came down, it took away the topsoil, it silted the areas around the country itself, and therefore the fish production was down. We can see a gradual trend going downward in many areas of the world, and that needs to be reversed. As Reverend Jackson says, a new direction needs to be established. When we see today an extinction problem that has never been seen since the days of the dinosaurs, 65 million years ago, today, in the last 20 years of the 20th century, over 1 million species of plants and animals, whole species, friends, whole species, perhaps as much as a fifth of all life forms on the planet Earth are going to be destroyed. And people around the country, many in faith communities and all different religions, are going to stand up and say that we have a spiritual need to stand up for other creatures because, as Albert Schweitzer once said, the noblest instinct of them all is the reverence for life itself. And so I believe that church groups and synagogues and other religious faith communities in America and around the world are going to stand up, even as they've already begun to stand up, and say that we have a stewardship responsibility and we need to begin to care for the earth. So I wanted to bring some of these matters to your attention because these are tremendously powerful circumstances that are reshaping life on this planet itself. And what we're doing here today is not simply trying to come up with an agenda that the National Rainbow Coalition can put in a book. The one thing Reverend Jackson knows is that there's a difference between just putting things on a shelf and the leadership to get them enacted. And that's what we're here for, to be able to grab on to some of these great trends that are literally destroying life on the planet. When Clay Peters, a man who has spent his life at the leadership of the environmental movement, a man who Mo Udall said he didn't know anything or anybody who was a better leader in the environment than Clay Peters, and Clay Peters comes here and says that we need to do something on the population bomb that is exploding, and he gave you the numbers, then clearly we need to be joining hands with Molly Yard, who gave a speech earlier today. She's asked to have the environmental movement come in and to join hands with her on the issue of choice for women. Is there any question but that we ought to say, when 800 million women around the world can't get birth control, that they ought to have birth control devices? That if they want to limit their family size, they ought to be allowed to have an American policy that at least supports it, and therefore get rid of that discredited Mexico City policy that is an embarrassment to the leadership of this country and an embarrassment to us as international leaders in this world. We should join hands with the women's movement in this country and around the world. It's essential. The second point is that we must begin to look at root issues. And those questions that Cindy brought up about diet are unfamiliar to the country at large, but I would remind you that 25 years ago, nobody in this country believed that eating meat or eating eggs was dangerous to your health. I certainly didn't know it, but now the Surgeon General tells me it is. Now the United Nations Environment Program comes out and says we ought to be eating lower on the food chain, not just for the health, which now many people in this country know, but because it is perhaps, alongside population control, perhaps the most important single thing we can do to save the environment. Because as individuals, the impact upon making making cows take 16 pounds of grain in to produce 1 pound of protein doesn't make sense from an efficiency point of view. The pollution levels of the production of meat are now being examined with a new eye. So while this is a new issue, it is an issue that has come into its own today. And so we have to hear today, and I want to call upon you in the audience to respond to some of these issues, because wherever it is, whether it's in the area of corporate behavior, where we have brought together the Valdez Principles, which is an effort of socially responsible firms to invest money in corporations who are going to do the right thing by the environment and are going to try to make progress on the environment. And we have speakers, I think, who will address that issue. Or whether it is an education program for children so that we can have the next generation understand that we need an environmental ethic that goes to the very soul of how we live our lives, because we must change the lifestyles that we have. There is no way that we can continue to exist. We are not going to be able to evolve spiritually. We won't evolve at all if we continue along the present path. I've often said, could you imagine what an Indian would feel like if he came back from 200 years ago, a short 200 years ago, and see what we have done to a land that he called sacred 200 years ago? Surely his heart would fill with tears. And he would ask, as I do, what does it take to inject a sense of urgency into the national leadership of this country? Do we have to tear a hole in the sky? Well, we've done it. Do we have to make the great seas rise because of global warming? Well, we've done it. We have started a course that we cannot continue if we are to survive as a species. And so we're here today to begin to talk about how we can change the direction, as Reverend Jackson said yesterday, to set forth a new paradigm, to dream the new dream, and to begin again to live with Mother Earth as we should have all along, and not with no respect as we have in the past. So I wanted to bring some of these things to your attention, because I believe that the whole host of these kinds of issues need to be a part of the rainbow and further a part of the agenda of world leadership, so that whenever there's a summit meeting, these issues are brought up. I think it can be done. Reverend Jackson's helped it to be done in the past, and I believe his leadership will continue to help it to be done in the future. So having said that, I would like to offer as one of the things that we recommend, not only the proposal to recommend the blueprint for the environment, which Clay Peters has spoken to, not only the question of eating lower the food chain, which Cindy Brinkman has spoken to, not only the question of making corporations be greener and at least commit to an environmental ethic that Sasha and others have spoken to. I would also like to recommend the proposal to have D.C. statehood come out of the environmental caucus, because after all it is an environmental issue as well. With that, I would like to turn to the floor for further comments. Thank you very much.